The Egyptians are united by an unshakable belief in life after death. It makes them build unique monuments that still captivate us today.
They have built something that is so fantastic and monumental that would live forever.
What secrets lie hidden in their funerary architecture? And what role do the pharaohs play in it?
The fascination about ancient Egypt is unbroken.
Day after day, the sun rises anew, only to set again in the evening. Year after year, the Nile floods its banks and gives new life to the land. For the ancient Egyptians, man is part of an eternal cycle of death and rebirth. It's this belief that held the Egyptian empire together for millennia. The Pyramids of Giza stand for this unshakable belief. They are not only the oldest, but also the only survivors of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Once the Pyramid of Khufu towered into the sky, nearly 147 meters high. Today it's a good 10 meters smaller. The inhabitants of Cairo use it as a quarry during the Middle Ages, which is why just a little under 138 meters remain today. Nevertheless, it's the largest pyramid in the world. Pharaoh Khufu, better known by his Greek name Cheops, commissions the monumental structure nearly 5,000 years ago. He names his pyramid Akhet Khufu, which means the horizon of Khufu. It's the time of the Old Kingdom, an era also called the Pyramid Age. But even the ingenious Egyptians started small. During the centuries before the pyramids, kings are buried in so-called mastabas. They probably developed from burial mounds covering the tombs of the first rulers of Egypt. The hotspot for this type of tomb is the necropolis of Abydos, about 500 kilometers south of present-day Cairo. Over a period of about 3,000 years, Egyptian rulers had their tombs and funerary temples built here.
Abydos is one of the oldest sites where we encounter an extensive burial ground, complete with royal tombs. During this period, an entire series of conceptions and rituals develops, which over the centuries will play an important role in Egypt.
From Abydos, the first pharaohs ruled the land, and it's here that their necropolis is built. An empire of the dead, built by the living on the west bank of the Nile, where the sun sets. More than 5,000 years ago, the first kings of Egypt are buried in Abydos. Like King Nama, the founder of the Egyptian empire, or his successor, Djoser, whose magnificent tomb is still revered by later generations as the resting place of Osiris, the god of the dead. Djoser's tomb gives an impression of how the early Egyptians imagined life after death. For their journey to the afterlife, Egyptian rulers order extensive underground complexes to be built. A long corridor leads to the main chamber, to the wooden shrine in which the king's sarcophagus rests. Wine, beer, grain, or dried meat are supposed to ensure that he will lack nothing in the afterlife. The funerary goods show that even back then, the Egyptians believed in life after death. After all, why waste precious objects on a dead person if you're not convinced that he can use them? Such as the funerary goods from the tomb of Khafre, a ruler of the Second Dynasty. For a king, gold decoration is a must. Or vessels made of precious bronze. Many of these things serve a practical purpose: to allow the deceased to continue life in the hereafter without the slightest hitch. For this, the dead are mainly given everyday objects to take with them. Later, sayings on the walls of the pyramids are added to ensure that the pharaoh will be well in the afterlife. During the Middle Kingdom, magic knives come into fashion, which, according to inscriptions, are supposed to protect mothers and children in the afterlife. From the New Kingdom onward, the Book of the Dead becomes a bestseller, a guide on how the deceased can survive the judgment of the dead and attain immortality. In the late period, the head of the deceased is placed on a so-called head disc. The magical amulet keeps him warm and will scare grave robbers away, so the belief. The architecture of the burial chambers, too, follows practical considerations. A staircase leads to the west, where, as the Egyptians believe, lies the realm of the dead. It allows the deceased king to leave his tomb and move on to the afterlife. Finally, the tomb is sealed with cedar beams and bricks. On top, a plain mound of earth.
The royal tombs were covered by burial mounds, since to create the tomb, a deep pit had to be sunk into the ground. The soil from this pit was then put back into the pit after the king was buried. This is a phenomenon found in other civilizations too, so that the burial site could be seen from afar.
The burial mound is also reminiscent of the creation myth of the ancient Egyptians, of the primordial mound that rose from the primordial flood. At the beginning of the Old Kingdom, the center of power shifts from Abydos to the north. Egypt's rulers are now buried in Giza, Saqqara, and Dahshur, in enormous tombs that still bear witness to their importance today. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh is the most important person in the state, an absolute ruler in whose hands all threads come together. As a direct link to the gods, it's his task to see to the welfare of his subjects. Yet the pharaoh is not only seen as a mediator between his people and the gods. He is himself divine. This belief makes him near untouchable and a guarantor of stability in the empire. The Egyptians therefore refer to their pharaoh as the living Horus, the god of heaven. The father of Horus is the powerful god Osiris. The Egyptians believe Osiris was once killed by his evil brother Seth. Yet Osiris' sister and wife Isis brought him back to life. Since then, Osiris has ruled over the realm of the dead, and every pharaoh is likened to him after his passing. The divine power of the pharaohs can be derived from their titles. The most important one, Son of Ra, the sun god. It's symbolized before each pharaoh's name by a goose and the sun disk. The necropolis of Saqqara, not far from Cairo. Here, the next step in the development of the perfect pyramid takes place. From the tumuli of the early tombs, the Egyptians develop a new idea, the so-called mastaba, meaning bench in Arabic. The inconspicuous mounds become rectangular brick buildings. Their shape already resembles a truncated pyramid. The mastaba is a perennial in the architecture of tombs. Private individuals continue to use it into the Middle Kingdom, and even rulers occasionally resort to it, like King Shepseskaf at the end of the 4th dynasty. Almost 100 meters long and 80 meters high, his mastaba is one of the largest in Egypt. The king's burial chamber is located deep underground, yet he not only completes his own tomb during his lifetime.
Cheops' calf was very unusual in that he also finished his father's pyramid for him. His father was Menkaure, who built the third pyramid of Giza. Cheops' calf finished everything in mud brick, which was easier to do, but it was an enormous mud brick construction project.
However, most kings are no longer content with mere mastabas. The age of the pyramids has begun. At Saqqara, the step pyramid opens a new chapter in funerary architecture. It's the world's first monumental structure built entirely of stone. It's built on the orders of King Djoser. Under his rule, Egypt experiences political stability and prosperity. Science and architecture break new ground, as is evidenced by the step pyramid. Its architect is known by name, Imhotep. Imhotep is highly gifted. He's considered the founder of Egyptian medicine and, according to legend, invented hieroglyphic writing. His tomb is unknown, yet through his achievements, he's become immortal. Thus, after his death, the Egyptians worship him as a god. Apart from the pharaohs, he's one of the few mortals to receive this honor. Even King Djoser pays homage to his master builder by having Imhotep's name and title inscribed on one of his royal statues. When designing the world's first pyramid, Imhotep develops the idea of the primordial mound even further. Scholars suggest that the step pyramid was originally planned as a mastaba, and that its expansion only came later. So was the first pyramid a product of chance?
But looking at the initial plan of this pyramid and at the position of the burial shaft, right in the middle of the final plan of this pyramid, it becomes obvious that the pyramid was planned as a pyramid from the early beginning.
Yet how does Imhotep manage to stabilize the huge construction? To achieve this, he develops a revolutionary technique. The blocks are not stacked vertically, but slightly inclined towards the pyramid core. Giving the building the necessary internal support. Around it, a huge necropolis is built. 15 hectares in size, the equivalent of about 20 soccer fields. And below, there's yet another city. At a depth of up to 40 meters, extends a kilometer-long labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, and shafts. Laser scans allow researchers to measure the underground city with great precision. A fine laser beam penetrates even the smallest interstices, and thus reveals 5 previously hidden passages. The site is larger than expected. The tunnel system confirms an assumption long held by researchers. The king's burial chamber is located exactly in the center of the underground city.
The Djoser complex is unusual in so many ways. There's almost 5 kilometers of underground passageways and tunnels if you add up all the lengths. Underneath the pyramid itself, there are 3 different levels. There's, the king's chamber where the granite Khafre was placed. Underneath that, you have these long galleries, probably for royal women. And then you have magazines and other access points coming down.
The stepped pyramid turns the king's tomb into a monumental structure. It becomes the prototype for all subsequent pyramids and shapes funerary architecture in ancient Egypt. Then Pharaoh Sneferu wants to set new standards with his so-called bent pyramid in Dahshur. The first stepless pyramid is intended to be 125 meters high. Sneferu had planned it as a magnificent burial site for himself. Alas, some grave construction errors interfere. At an angle of 60 degrees, the inclination is too steep, and the sandy subsoil causes the building to sink in the middle. To stabilize the pyramid, a belt about 16 meters wide with a 54-degree inclination is placed around the structure. Yet the rescue attempt fails. The stones begin to slide. Cracks appear everywhere. In a last attempt, the builders flattened the angle of inclination of the upper part to 43 degrees. The result, a pyramid with a kink.
The bent pyramid is a transition form. It marks the transition from the step pyramid to the true pyramid. The pyramid might be seen as a failure, but still, the ancient Egyptian architects learned so much about structure, about the rising angle, about the position of placing the bricks and the stones of the pyramid, so that this pyramid actually was the one that allowed for the fantastic completion of the Khufu pyramid.
Since a grave with defects is out of the question, Sneferu opts for another attempt, the Red Pyramid. Only 2 kilometers north of the bent pyramid, it's built on more stable ground. It has an additional foundation of several layers of limestone, and its planners used a flattened angle of 43 degrees right from the start, and thus achieved the necessary stability. The first true pyramid rises 105 meters in height. Where Sneferu is buried is still an open question. Like that of many others, his mummy probably fell victim to grave robbers. Yet he probably chose the Red Pyramid as his tomb, while the bent pyramid served as a mock tomb or as a site of worship. With the Red Pyramid, the development from burial mound to pyramid is complete. Yet Sneferu's son wants to surpass his father's building skills. His name, Khufu. He chooses a new area for his envisioned tomb, the Plateau of Giza. Conditions here are perfect. There's enough space, sufficient building material on site, and the rocky ground offers an ideal subsoil for his mammoth project. Since what Khufu has in mind is nothing less than the largest structure in the world. How the Egyptians managed to build this gigantic monument is a matter of dispute, even today. At least, there are clues as to who built it. For a task like this, Khufu needs a gifted architect, and probably finds him in a man named Hemiunu. He holds the office of vizier and is thus the second most powerful man in the land. For his services, Khufu later bestows upon him the title of Overseer of all the king's building works. Hemiunu's pyramid rises 146.5 meters into the sky, and thus eclipses all other structures, a record that will stand for more than 4,000 years. Only the Gothic cathedrals of the Middle Ages come close to this record height, and eventually replace the Khufu pyramid as the tallest structure in the world. Another outstanding feature is its perfect shape. The Khufu pyramid stands on an exact square. Its flawless appearance is further ensured by the white limestone covering its surface. Since the stone on the Giza plateau is not fine enough for this purpose, the covering slabs have to be brought in via the Nile. Back then, its riverbed runs closer to the pyramids than it does today. The pyramid is aligned exactly on the north-south axis. And it's probably crowned by a gilded keystone. Yet, how could they build such accurate structures more than 4,000 years ago? Teamwork between astronomers and engineers is crucial. Astronomers determine the cardinal directions by observing the stars. A circular wall forms an artificial horizon over which a star is pointed. The astronomer then observes the path of the star and marks the points of its rising and setting on the wall. The two measuring points are extended to the base of the wall by plumb bob and connected to the center of the circle. The two lines form an angle, with the center pointing due north. And not only the alignment to the four cardinal directions is perfect, all sides are also at right angles to each other. The Egyptians may not know the theorem of Pythagoras, yet they have methods of their own. For example, they place two wooden posts on a straight line. Then, using two ropes of equal length, two circles are drawn. The intersection of the circles allows a right angle to be determined. Arithmetic and writing are among the basic skills of Egyptian civil servants. They administer the state. Taxes and food distribution must be organized, as well as the king's huge building projects. To cope with these complex tasks, they use the first numerical signs. But what about their mathematical skills? There are symbols for numbers on stone monuments and in temples. However, they reveal little about the mathematics used. Only papyri from the Middle Kingdom show that Egyptians knew multiplication and division. Many papyri are copies of older works. Without this mathematical knowledge, pyramid building would not have been possible.
The ancient Egyptians had a wide range of mathematical knowledge. According to the Greeks, they were the inventors of geometry. In any case, they were quite familiar with the various forms of calculation, even if it worked a little differently. If we look at their architecture, the division of the country with its clearly drawn borders, as well as the borders between individual fields, we see that the Egyptians had a highly exact mathematical knowledge, not only in a practical sense, but also on an abstract level.
An estimated 1 billion man-hours went into the construction of the Khufu pyramid. Approximately 2.3 million stone blocks have to be cut out of the rock by the workers, with each block weighing about 2.5 tons. Some of them are brought from far away. They arrive at the construction site via the harbour near the City of the Dead. For 4,500 years, the enigmatic Sphinx has watched over the pyramids here. A lion with a human head. His face alone is 4 meters wide. The Great Sphinx of Giza is the largest statue in the world, carved from one piece. Few man-made works are as enigmatic as this one. No one knows what purpose the Sphinx originally served. We don't even know who had it erected. Khufu or his son Khafre? And is the Sphinx a he or a she? At least this mystery can be solved. Unlike their Greek counterparts, Egyptian sphinxes mostly represent men, as is the case in Giza. Thus, to Egyptologists, the Sphinx is a male. But the biggest mystery remains. What happened to the nose of the Sphinx? That Napoleon had the nose shot off with a cannon belongs to the realm of legends. The fact is, as late as the 14th century, Islamic fundamentalists feared that Egyptians might once again worship the Sphinx as a god. To them, this was idolatry. So, to put a definitive end to this, they hacked off the statue's nose. Since then, the Sphinx looks towards the rising sun without its nose. Today, the Sphinx is as famous as the pyramids, yet it's just a product of recycling. It was cut from the remains of the limestone quarry left after the pyramids were built. Most of the building material for the pyramids comes from Giza itself. But where does the fine limestone for the outer casing come from? The builders find it in the quarry of Tura, about 20 kilometers from Giza. Researchers speculated for a long time about how the Egyptians transported the huge blocks to the construction site in Giza. Then, in 2013, archaeologists made a discovery. 800 snippets of a papyrus from the time of Khufu. By painstaking work, the fragments are put together. The result exceeds all expectations. It's first-hand information about the construction of the pyramids.
Building the Great Pyramid most probably involved the entire country and people from all over the two lands, the Delta and Upper Egypt. And this is exemplified by one of the most important discoveries in the history of my career, and that's the Wadi al-Jarf papyri. These papyri look like Excel spreadsheets, literally, with rows and columns. This is all about how the pyramids helped to build Egypt.
The papyri fragments are notes of an overseer named Mera. He documents every step of his workers and everything they bring from Tura to Giza. But what can the numbers tell us?
Basically, all that infrastructure for developing these giant pyramids, it's like the US freeway system or the space program. All that infrastructure was now used for the country as a whole. The accounting, the coordination of the different governorate. The infrastructure is more important for its own right to sustain Egypt as now a sophisticated civilization.
Pyramid building also boosts technical development. New types of ships are needed to transport materials. Via the Nile, they carry their freight from Tura to Giza every 4 to 5 days. They can also navigate the shallow canals that only carry water during the Nile flood. This allows blocks of stones weighing tons to be brought close to the pyramid. Yet how were the Egyptians able to handle the huge blocks? Most scholars assume ramps. However, even at a 10% gradient, a ramp to the top of the Khufu pyramid would have to stretch over more than 1 kilometer. Building such a ramp would require more material than building the pyramid itself. A spiral ramp would require less building material, but the blocks would have been difficult to maneuver around the many corners. And it would have ruled out precise measuring of the actual pyramid. To this day, experts are at loggerheads over the shape and function of the ramps. Who actually built the pyramids was long considered a mystery. Was the work done by slaves, as is handed down by the Greek historian Herodotus? Archaeological finds bring light into the darkness here as well. Close to the pyramids, archaeologists have found a residential settlement of craftsmen. And their nearby cemetery shows they were not slaves, as there is no life after death for slaves. They must have been workers in the service of the king.
The pyramids at Giza were built as tombs for the kings. And the kings were very clever about this, because one thing that they were doing was they were getting, instead of taxes, they were getting labor. And they were doing this during a time when, for 4 months of the year, there was a flood. And during this time, all of the people who were farmers would not be working. So this was a way of uniting them and also keeping them away from the inns and the coffee houses or whatever, so that they wouldn't be sitting there drinking their beer and saying, ooh, the government's bad. Instead, they were working as a group. It was sort of a team-building effort, and in this case, it was nation-building, perhaps the first nation-building effort ever made.
To the pharaohs, the pyramids not only ensure their survival in the afterlife, as a nationwide project, they also prevent uprisings. Since, in addition to burial places near the pharaoh, the workers receive good pay. Since grain is the currency back then, they get it in the form of bread or beer, which is part of the staple diet of the ancient Egyptians. And to ensure their ability to work, there is first-class medical care.
We know that some of them suffered from accidents because they had broken bones that have been set by the doctor, and other things that happened because you could see they had problems with their backs because they were carrying heavy loads.
The Egyptians already knew about the healing power of many plants, like frankincense for pain, aloe vera for skin diseases, or pomegranate against tapeworms. Even the antibiotic effect of honey is known to them. Medicine in ancient Egypt is amazingly advanced. Even more than 4,000 years ago, foot reflexology is practiced here. A so-called Book of Wounds systematically describes the treatment of open wounds, broken bones, and strains. Severed limbs are replaced with elaborately crafted prostheses, like this artificial toe made of wood. Forceps, scissors, drills. A temple relief shows what may well be the first medical instruments of mankind. Amputations, treating bone fractures, and even operations of the skull are possible with them. The large-scale pyramid project unites the entire country. Be they rulers or workers, they are all part of a sacred hierarchy that holds the empire of the pharaohs together. At the top is the pharaoh. Below him, priests, ministers, and generals. Then there are the scribes and officials. On the lowest level, workers and peasants. Each has a fixed place in a fixed order, like the stones of a pyramid. Any pharaoh's task is to maintain this order, in this world as in the hereafter. The pyramid is therefore more than just his tomb. It's also the place of his resurrection. Therefore, a pharaoh cannot afford to be late in building it.
once a king ascended the throne, the tombs started to be built immediately. And it is interesting because, of course, some kings reigned for a very long time and others for quite a short time. So you never knew how long you were going to live. So you would probably start building as soon as possible and maybe hope that it got done, or most of it got done, before you died.
After a long reign of at least 23 years, King Khufu dies. In a solemn procession, the priests carry him into the pyramid. Inside, everything is carefully prepared. The way leads through the great gallery made of limestone. At the end of the passage, which is almost 47 meters long and about 9 meters high, the procession reaches the burial chamber. There, the granite sarcophagus of the king is already waiting. To keep out grave robbers, the entrance is closed with 3 granite blocks, weighing 2.5 tons each. Traces of the pulleys and guide ropes for the blocks can still be found in the 4-meter-high pitfall chamber. Yet how could workers move the heavy blocks with such simple tools? With a 1-to-1 scale replica of the chamber, researchers at the University of Kassel, Germany, put the contraption to the test. The secret is hemp ropes. They're ingeniously looped around the drop stones and the round beams. Then sufficient friction is created between them. It's supposed to slow down the blocks as they are lowered, and indeed, they can be moved surprisingly easily by just 2 people. However, this safety system did not help. With hammer, chisel, and a lot of patience, grave robbers nevertheless succeed in penetrating the king's chamber. Once the king is laid to rest, he may begin his journey to the afterlife. The pyramid serves as a kind of stairway to heaven, as is written on the walls of the burial chambers. A stairway to heaven is erected for you. May the heavens make the sun's rays strong for you, so that you may ascend as the eye of Ra, the sun god. As long as the godlike ruler dwells in heaven, there will be life on earth. Such was the firm belief of the ancient Egyptians. The building of the pyramids isn't merely a great moment in the history of mankind. In the Egyptian people, it awakened a sense of community that lasted for millennia.
They have built something that is so fantastic and monumental that would live forever. And this was also a great achievement and a way for making people united and purposeful.
For more than 500 years, the pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom rule successfully until their power slowly wanes. Chaos, famine, and civil war ensue. Even the Pyramids of Giza are looted. The rulers of the Middle Kingdom can stop the decline and have new, alas not so magnificent, pyramids built. Yet again, the central government collapses. Egypt is divided in 2, dominated in the north by the hostile Hyksos. Until Ahmose I unites the country again, he is the last king to erect a pyramid. Then a dynasty originating from magnificent Thebes comes to power. It's the beginning of the new kingdom and a new era of funerary architecture. For better protection against grave robbers, the pharaohs are no longer buried in pyramids, but in magnificent underground rock tombs. For their royal necropolis, they choose a valley near Thebes. Its special feature, a pyramid-shaped mountain that towers above it. The legendary Valley of the Kings.
The pharaohs of the new kingdom came from a family that had long since settled in Thebes, so that's where their ancestors were buried, and that's where they themselves wanted to be buried.
More than 60 tombs and pits have been found so far. The names of the dead are a who's who of Egyptian history. Among them, pharaohs like Seti I, Ramses II, Ramses IV, and Tutankhamun. The tombs are driven up to 140 meters deep into the mountains. And there are entire palaces. An endless labyrinth of pitfalls, false doors and fake passages is supposed to frustrate tomb robbers. No expense seems too great to protect the dead pharaoh and his treasures. Yet have the royal families the valley all to themselves? A team of archaeologists from the University of Basel, Switzerland, makes a telling discovery in tombs KV64 and KV40. Even the supposedly protected location in the valley did not prevent looting.
KV40 was intensively robbed both in ancient and in modern times, and both times it was also set afire. Looking closely at the numerous shards of clay vessels, we found inscriptions and were able to identify 32 names. 26 of them were women. All these people are from the closest environment of a pharaoh, Amenhotep III.
In 2012, Susanna Bickel's team makes another sensational discovery. Tomb KV64 is the first tomb since that of Tutankhamun that's still sealed. Inside, an intact sarcophagus. Beneath the rubble, the researchers discover another mummy. It belongs to an unknown princess from the New Kingdom. Tomb robbers have looted the chamber after it was first used and didn't care for her mummy. The looting of graves is not uncommon in ancient Egypt, but in the intermediate periods, there is a particularly high incidence of looting. Around the year 1000 BC, it's probably the once wealthy priests of all people who help themselves to the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, robbing those they're supposed to protect. Only a few remains of the once magnificent grave goods are preserved. So far, there are no clues as to the identity of the unknown princess. But who does the sarcophagus belong to? It dates from the 3rd Intermediate period, so it's younger than the princess. A stele is found next to the coffin. It's exceptionally well preserved and probably shows the young woman who was buried here. Her name is Nehemes Bastet. However, she's not a king's daughter. During the 3rd Intermediate period, Egypt breaks up into 2 realms. The pharaoh rules the north from Tanis. The powerful Amun priests of Thebes rule the south of the land. Nehemes Bastet is the daughter of a high priest of Amun. She bears the title Singer of Amun and is thus part of the new elite. Her family buries her in the tomb of a princess, and this makes her immortal. For her sarcophagus preserves her name and title for posterity. Nehemes Bastet, Singer of Amun. A surprise for archaeologists too. The find shows that the Valley of the Kings has by no means given up all its secrets. Constructing their tombs remains a top priority for every pharaoh of the new kingdom. The manpower employed seems limitless. Unskilled laborers carve passages and chambers into the rock. For the work inside, there are highly specialized craftsmen. Stonemasons, carpenters, painters, everything is planned down to the smallest detail. An entire industry develops around provisioning for the afterlife. Bakers are needed, laundresses, and countless other trades. They form an important part of the economy of the country. For the workers, the pharaohs have a specially designed settlement built in the Valley of the Kings, Set Ma'at.
Preparation for death played a tremendous role in ancient Egypt. It was an important economic factor too. Just ask yourself, how rich must a country be, how well off its people, that a death cult of this kind was possible? To me, it's striking that Egypt could afford a death cult and a cult of their gods that must have consumed half of the country's economic wealth.
Fast die Hälfte des gesamten wirtschaftlichen Vermögens des Landes aufbrauchte.
Above the settlement, the cemetery for the inhabitants of Set Ma'at emerges. Pyramid-shaped superstructures rise above the graves. They are chapels, private places of worship for the cult of the sun. Until now, a pyramid was reserved for the pharaoh.
Not everyone may have had an exquisitely painted tomb, yet even the burials of ordinary people were now a bit more elaborate, proving once again that the Egyptians believed that they could thereby secure their prosperity in life as well as in the hereafter.
They are the harbingers of a new funerary architecture and signs of a new era. King Akhenaten had tried to replace the multitude of Egyptian gods with the cult of Aten, thereby shaking the belief of the Egyptians. In the aftermath, Egyptians develop a more personal form of piety. People begin to address the gods directly instead of via their ruler. The upheaval is also evident inside the tombs. Instead of everyday scenes, now motifs and inscriptions from the Book of the Dead decorate the walls. There are even entire scenes from the Book of the Underworld. Previously, this had been a privilege of the pharaoh. The Book of the Dead guides the deceased through the underworld, where trials and the judgment of Osiris await him. If he passes, he reaches the Sekhet Iaru, the ancient Egyptians' paradise. Even for a pharaoh, there's no easy way past Osiris. He too must first pass the tests if he is to take his place among the gods after death. For this, he must travel through the realm of Osiris. The pictures on the walls of his tomb are supposed to help him on this journey. Each night, the pharaoh goes through the same ritual. Whenever the sun sets, the sun god Ra sets out on his bark on a journey through the underworld. There, he battles demons and the serpentine god Apophis to reappear on Earth reborn next morning. The pharaoh fights alongside Ra on this journey. The eternal cycle of death and rebirth is to preserve the order of the world.
For the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was a continuation of their life. So they would spend a lot of effort during their life in building tombs as eternal resting places. Even in modern times, this can still be noticed in the traditions of Egyptians, be it Coptic or Muslim.
The Egyptians' unwavering belief in an afterlife and a continuation of life after death is reflected in many religions to this day. It's this belief that held the empire together for over 3,000 years. With their pyramids and royal tombs, they created monuments for eternity. And in the end, they actually became immortal.